Welcome to Tales of the Grimdark, where we dive into the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40k universe to explore the twisted lore, epic battles, and malevolent characters that make this world so compelling. Today, we take you on a journey into the decayed heart of the DEATHGUARD, followers of Nurgle, the chaos god of decay, pestilence, and rebirth through rot. These once proud warriors, led by their Primarch Mortarion, have fallen into corruption, embracing a philosophy of endurance through decay, spreading the gifts of Nurgle across the galaxy in an unstoppable tide of plague. We'll explore their tragic origins, the slow and insidious fall to chaos, and the dark forces that now guide their every move. From their early days on the toxic world of Barbarous to their rise as harbingers of plague, this is the tale of the Lords of the DEATHGUARD. Stay with us as we unravel the history, philosophy, and horrifying tactics of these diseased warriors, and how their devotion to decay makes them one of the most feared forces in the galaxy. Let's begin. Chapter 1: Origins of the DEATHGUARD. The story of the DEATHGUARD begins in a poisoned world, a place so deadly and inhospitable that it would break the spirits of any lesser being. This was the world of Barbarous, a death world shrouded in a thick layer of toxic fog, where the air was so polluted with venomous gases that any unprotected human would die within moments. Life here was harsh, brutal, and unforgiving, yet it was also the birthplace of one of the most feared Primarchs of the At, Mortarion. Mortarion, like the other Primarchs, was scattered across the galaxy by the forces of chaos before he could be claimed by the Emperor of mankind. The cruel fate that awaited him would define his entire existence. Barbarous was ruled by necromantic warlords, towering beings who lived in the mountains high above the poisonous fog, immune to its deadly effects. These warlords treated the humans of the lower valleys as slaves, forcing them to toil and die in the name of their twisted ambitions. It was in this nightmare world that the infant Mortarion was found by one of the most powerful of these warlords. The Primarch, despite his extraordinary resistance to the toxic environment, was still a mere infant, vulnerable and alone. The warlord raised him in the poisoned peaks, teaching him the art of war, of death, and of domination. But as Mortarion grew, so too did his awareness of the suffering endured by the humans below. Mortarion's heart, though hardened by the harshness of his world, was filled with a burning hatred for the warlords and their cruelty. He yearned to free the people of the valleys from their oppression, and in time he would lead a rebellion against his own foster father. Armed with the knowledge of warfare he had gained from his time in the mountains, Mortarion descended into the valleys, gathering the scattered human survivors into a makeshift army. Their struggle was long and brutal, but Mortarion's leadership was unyielding. He taught his followers to fight with grim determination, to endure the unbearable, and to embrace suffering as a path to strength. Slowly the warlords were driven back, and Mortarion's army marched ever higher into the mountains. The final confrontation came when Mortarion sought to challenge his foster father, the warlord who had raised him. At the very summit of the highest mountain, where the air was so thick with poison that even Mortarion struggled to breathe, he faced his greatest foe. But the toxic atmosphere overwhelmed him. Just as Mortarion was on the verge of death, the Emperor of mankind appeared. The Emperor had come to claim his lost son, but in doing so, he robbed Mortarion of his final victory. The Emperor slew the warlord effortlessly, sparing Mortarion from death, but forever seeding bitterness in his heart. Mortarion resented the Emperor for saving him, for denying him the chance to prove his strength by his own hand. Though he would go on to join the Emperor's great crusade, this resentment would fester, slowly poisoning Mortarion's soul in much the same way that the air of Barbarous poisoned his body. Upon being reunited with the Emperor, Mortarion was given command of the 14th Legion, the Dusk Raiders, a legion known for their tenacity in battle and their expertise in grueling attritional warfare. However, under Mortarion's leadership, the legion would be transformed into something far more fearsome, the DEATHGUARD. Mortarion's harsh upbringing on Barbarous shaped his philosophy of war. He believed that strength was found through endurance, that the only way to survive in a hostile universe was to become as resilient as the environment itself. The Deathguard reflected this belief. Mortarion trained his warriors to be relentless, to endure hardship, and to fight without mercy. They would march through toxic wastelands, endure radiation and disease, and press forward when other legions would falter. The Deathguard became masters of siege warfare and attrition, able to grind down their enemies through sheer persistence. Their armor was modified to resist toxins and radiation, allowing them to fight in the most inhospitable environments. Mortarion's hatred of weakness meant that his warriors were expected to endure without complaint. They would never retreat, never falter, and never ask for aid. In Mortarion's eyes, the only way to achieve true victory was through suffering. The Deathguard quickly earned a reputation as one of the most resilient and unforgiving legions in the Imperium. Their ability to fight in environments that would cripple other legions made them invaluable in campaigns across the galaxy. Mortarion's grim philosophy was reflected in the way his warriors operated. They were unyielding, brutal, and methodical, spreading death wherever they marched. However, beneath this strength lay the seeds of their eventual corruption. Mortarion's disdain for weakness would become his undoing, as his desire for strength through endurance would lead him down a path of decay that would ultimately consume him and his legion. During the Great Crusade, the Deathguard played a vital role in the expansion of the Imperium. They were often deployed in the most hostile environments, where their resilience made them the perfect tool for bringing rebellious worlds to heel. Mortarion, though loyal to the Emperor at first, never fully embraced the ideals of the Imperium. He saw the Emperor's vision of unity as another form of tyranny, not unlike the rule of the warlords on Barbarous. Mortarion's bitterness towards the Emperor grew over time. He saw the Emperor as a distant figure, more concerned with his grand vision than with the well-being of his sons. While other Primarchs reveled in the glory of the Great Crusade, Mortarion fought with grim determination, but also with growing discontent. The Deathguard's successes in the Great Crusade were undeniable. They brought entire systems to compliance, their methodical warfare breaking the back of resistance wherever they went. Yet Mortarion could not shake the feeling that the Emperor was using him and his legion as tools to achieve his own goals, rather than viewing them as equals. As the Great Crusade wore on, Mortarion's disillusionment deepened. He began to question the Emperor's motives, and this doubt would ultimately make him susceptible to the influence of darker powers. The seeds of corruption had been planted, and it would not be long before the Deathguard would turn their backs on the Imperium they had once fought to build. Chapter 2, The Fall to Chaos. The fall of Mortarion and the Deathguard into chaos was not a sudden event, but rather the culmination of years of festering resentment, mistrust, and dark influences. For Mortarion, the seeds of corruption were sown long before the heresy, long before the whispers of the Chaos Gods even entered his mind. They took root in his discontent with the Emperor and his vision for the Imperium. Mortarion had always seen the Emperor as a distant, cold figure. He was grateful to the Emperor for rescuing him from Barbarous and granting him command of the Deathguard. But there was always a feeling of bitterness, a sense that the Emperor had robbed him of his rightful victory against his adoptive father. As Mortarion fought in the Great Crusade, this bitterness only deepened. He could not understand why the Emperor valued the ideals of unity and compliance more than the strength of endurance and suffering that had defined Mortarion's existence. As the Great Crusade dragged on, Mortarion found himself increasingly disillusioned. The Emperor's vision of a unified galaxy seemed naive to him, a dream that ignored the harsh realities of the universe. Mortarion had been raised in a world where only the strong survived, where suffering was a constant companion, and where weakness was punished by death. He believed that the Emperor's desire to protect humanity from suffering was futile. Suffering, Mortarion thought, was inevitable and necessary. It was this belief that made Mortarion susceptible to the influence of chaos. He did not seek out the chaos gods, but their whispers found him nonetheless. They promised him strength, power, and the ability to impose his own brutal philosophy of survival on the galaxy. And of all the chaos gods, it was Nurgle, the god of decay and despair, who resonated most with Mortarion's worldview. Nurgle offered Mortarion the ultimate strength, endurance through decay. Under Nurgle's influence, suffering was not something to be avoided or feared. It was something to be embraced, a path to resilience. Nurgle's philosophy echoed Mortarion's own belief that true strength came through hardship and suffering. The corruption was slow, insidious, and almost imperceptible at first. But as Mortarion's dissatisfaction with the Emperor grew, so too did Nurgle's influence over him. The pivotal moment in the DEATHGUARD's fall to chaos came during the Horus Heresy, the great civil war that tore the Imperium apart. Mortarion, already disillusioned with the Emperor, was approached by Horus, the War Master. Horus, who had already turned to chaos, sought to bring Mortarion and the DEATHGUARD into his rebellion against the Emperor. At first, Mortarion resisted. He had no love for the Chaos Gods, and he still harbored some loyalty to the Emperor, however begrudging it was. But Horus was persuasive. He played on Mortarion's fears and insecurities, convincing him that the Emperor had lied to them, that he had never intended to give his sons the freedom they deserved. Horus painted the Emperor as a tyrant, no different from the warlords of Barbarous, who sought to rule the galaxy through control and oppression. Mortarion, filled with bitterness and a desire to free himself from the Emperor's influence, eventually sided with Horus. However, this decision would lead to the ultimate betrayal of everything Mortarion once stood for. As the Horus Heresy raged on, the DEATHGUARD found themselves trapped in the warp while en route to Terra, the seat of the Emperor's power. This was no ordinary misfortune. The DEATHGUARD had become ensnared in a realm where time and space had no meaning, where the laws of physics were twisted and broken. And in this nightmare dimension, Nurgle finally claimed his prize. The DEATHGUARD was slowly consumed by disease. The ship became a living tomb, filled with the stench of decay and the screams of the dying. No matter how hard they fought, no matter how strong their endurance, the diseases ravaged them without mercy. Their bodies rotted, their flesh sloughed off their bones, and their organs bloated with pus and corruption. Yet they did not die. Nurgle's plagues were not meant to kill quickly. They were meant to transform. As Mortarion watched his warriors suffer, he was powerless to stop it. He had always prided himself on his strength and endurance, but here in the warp, those qualities meant nothing. His warriors were succumbing to the very thing he had spent his life fighting against: decay. In his moment of despair, Nurgle offered Mortarion a way out. The plague god promised to spare Mortarion and his legion from the endless torment of disease, to grant them the strength to endure this suffering and rise again, more powerful than ever before. Desperate to save his warriors, Mortarion accepted Nurgle's offer. But in doing so, he condemned himself and the DEATHGUARD to an eternity of rot and corruption. The DEATHGUARD were transformed into plague marines, bloated, disease-ridden monstrosities whose bodies were forever bound to the will of Nurgle. Mortarion himself was elevated to the rank of Demon Primarch, becoming a living avatar of decay. His bitterness, his hatred, and his desire for strength had led him to this dark transformation, and there would be no turning back. The DEATHGUARD emerged from the warp as something entirely different from what they had once been. No longer the Emperor's warriors, they were now the Plague Fleet, agents of Nurgle, spreading disease and death across the galaxy in the name of their new god. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the DEATHGUARD were no longer united by a singular purpose. The death of Horus and the failure of the traitor legions to overthrow the Emperor fractured the forces of chaos. Many legions splintered into war bands, each led by its own warlord, with their own ambitions. The DEATHGUARD were no exception. While Mortarion remained the undisputed master of the Legion, many of his commanders, particularly Typhus, the first captain, sought to carve out their own realms of power within the Eye of Terror and beyond. Typhus, a loyal servant of Nurgle, led the Plague Fleet in a series of campaigns designed to spread the gifts of Nurgle far and wide. His zeal for Nurgle's cause was unmatched, and he quickly became one of the most feared and respected figures within the DEATHGUARD. Other warbands of the DEATHGUARD pursued their own agendas, each spreading disease and despair in their own way. Some sought to conquer new worlds, bringing entire systems under the sway of Nurgle. Others focused on perfecting the art of plaguecraft, creating new and horrific diseases to unleash upon their enemies. Yet despite their differences, all of the warbands remained united by their devotion to Nurgle and their shared legacy as Plague Marines. The galaxy was now their playground, and wherever they went, they left a trail of death and decay in their wake. Entire planets were transformed into festering hives of disease, their populations either consumed by Nurgle's plagues or twisted into grotesque mockeries of life. The DEATHGUARD had become the embodiment of Nurgle's philosophy, an unstoppable force of decay that would eventually consume all things. In the 41st millennium, the DEATHGUARD remain one of the most powerful and feared of the traitor legions. Mortarion continues to lead his forces from the Plague Planet, a twisted realm within the Eye of Terror that serves as the heart of Nurgle's power in the material universe. From there, he sends his warbands out into the galaxy to spread Nurgle's gifts and to challenge the forces of the Imperium wherever they are found. But for Mortarion, there is no peace. Despite his power, despite his status as a demon primarch, the bitterness that once consumed him still lingers. He is trapped in an eternal cycle of decay, forever bound to Nurgle, forever cursed to spread the very thing he once sought to escape. In his heart, Mortarion remains the bitter child of Barbarous, resentful of the Emperor, resentful of his fate, and resentful of the universe that has condemned him to an eternity of rot. Chapter 3. Mortarion, the Reaper Primarch. To truly understand Mortarion, we must delve into the core of his philosophy, his twisted worldview that ultimately led him to embrace Nurgle's gifts. Mortarion's entire life, from his earliest memories on Barbarous to his ascension as a demon primarch, has been shaped by one defining principle: suffering breeds strength. On Barbarous, Mortarion grew up in a world shrouded in toxic mists and ruled by cruel warlords who used their mastery of the dark arts to enslave the planet's population. The people of Barbarous lived in constant fear of their overlords, subjected to unimaginable suffering. It was in this crucible of hardship that Mortarion was forged, and from these experiences he developed an unshakable belief that only through suffering could true strength be attained. He grew to despise weakness in all its forms, whether it manifested in the physical frailty of the human body or the mental weakness of those who sought to escape pain. Mortarion's hatred for weakness was not just a personal philosophy, it became the guiding principle of the DEATHGUARD Legion. Under his leadership, the DEATHGUARD were shaped into warriors of unparalleled endurance. Mortarion taught his sons to embrace suffering, to see pain and hardship not as obstacles but as tools to be mastered. The DEATHGUARD became known for their resilience, their ability to endure conditions that would cripple other legions. Poison, disease, and environmental hazards, none of these could stop the DEATHGUARD. They fought on, not because they were immune to suffering, but because they had learned to transcend it. But this philosophy of strength through suffering had a dark side. It bred in Mortarion a profound bitterness, not only toward the weak, but toward the very nature of the universe. He saw the Emperor's grand vision of a united and prosperous Imperium as a lie, a fragile dream that ignored the reality of existence, that life is suffering, and only those who embrace this truth can survive. This disillusionment with the Emperor's ideals played a key role in Mortarion's eventual betrayal. He could not accept the Emperor's rejection of the harsh, brutal lessons that Barbarous had taught him. In Mortarion's eyes, the Emperor was sheltering humanity from the inevitable truth that only through suffering could they find true strength. When Nurgle first whispered to Mortarion, offering him power and the ability to endure all suffering, it was a message that resonated deeply with the Reaper Primarch. Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, did not shy away from suffering. He embraced it, reveled in it, and saw it as a natural and inevitable part of existence. To Nurgle, decay was not a form of weakness. It was a form of transformation, a necessary process through which new life could emerge. In Nurgle's eyes, suffering was not an end, but a beginning. This philosophy was a perfect fit for Mortarion's worldview. Nurgle's teachings validated everything Mortarion had come to believe, that life was suffering, and that true strength could only be found in embracing this truth. The difference was that, where Mortarion had once seen suffering as a test of endurance, Nurgle showed him that suffering was a path to transformation. By embracing Nurgle's gifts, Mortarion could transcend the limitations of his flesh, becoming something more than mortal, something eternal. And so Mortarion accepted Nurgle's offer, not out of fear or desperation, but out of a deep-seated belief that Nurgle's way was the only true path. In doing so, Mortarion turned his back on the Emperor and his vision for humanity, embracing the philosophy of decay and despair that Nurgle embodied. From this point forward, Mortarion would no longer see suffering as something to be endured. He would see it as something to be embraced, something to be spread across the galaxy in the name of his new god. Mortarion's transformation into a demon primarch was the ultimate expression of his new allegiance to Nurgle. Once a mere mortal, albeit a primarch, he was now something far more, a demon prince, imbued with the power of a god. This transformation was not merely physical, though Mortarion's appearance was drastically altered. It was also a spiritual and metaphysical evolution, as Mortarion became a living embodiment of Nurgle's will. Physically, Mortarion's body bloated and decayed, taking on the characteristics of Nurgle's plague marines, but on a far grander scale. His once gaunt figure became swollen with corruption, his flesh rotting away in some places while festering and pulsing with unholy life in others. He was no longer a mere man. He was a towering figure of rot and ruin, clad in tattered, plague-ridden armor that constantly exuded the foul stench of decay. But Mortarion's true power as a demon primarch lay not in his physical form, but in the connection he now had to the warp and to Nurgle himself. As a demon primarch, Mortarion could channel the raw power of the Immaterium, wielding it in battle to devastating effect. His presence alone was enough to spread Nurgle's plagues, causing enemy soldiers to wither and die in his wake. His touch could rot flesh and metal alike, and the diseases that he carried were so virulent that even the hardiest of foes would succumb to them in short order. Mortarion's new powers also gave him an edge in combat. He was already a formidable warrior before his transformation, having honed his skills in the brutal environment of Barbarous and the countless battles of the Great Crusade. But as a demon primarch, Mortarion was nearly unstoppable. His scythe, Silence, had been imbued with the power of the warp, allowing it to cut through even the most heavily armored opponents with ease. His ability to summon and control Nurgle's demons made him a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield, as legions of plague-bearers and Nurglings followed him into battle, spreading disease and corruption wherever they went. Despite his immense power, however, Mortarion remained a deeply tragic figure. His transformation into a demon primarch had given him everything he had ever wanted: power, strength, and the ability to impose his will on the galaxy. But it had also cost him his humanity. Mortarion had become a creature of decay, forever bound to the will of Nurgle. He was no longer the master of his own fate, but a puppet of the plague god, doomed to spread death and disease across the galaxy for all eternity. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, Mortarion continues to serve Nurgle as one of his most powerful and feared champions. He leads the Death Guard from the Plague Planet, a twisted world located deep within the Eye of Terror. This world, once a fertile paradise, has been utterly consumed by Nurgle's corruption, transformed into a festering hellscape where disease and decay reign supreme. It is here that Mortarion commands his forces, plotting new campaigns to spread Nurgle's plagues across the galaxy. Mortarion's primary goal in the 41st millennium is the same as it has always been: to spread Nurgle's gifts to as many worlds as possible. He leads the Plague Fleet in a never-ending series of invasions, targeting Imperial worlds and other factions alike. Wherever Mortarion goes, death follows. Entire planets have been laid to waste by his plagues, their populations reduced to little more than walking corpses before finally succumbing to the inevitable decay. One of Mortarion's most infamous campaigns in the 41st millennium was the Plague Wars, a series of conflicts fought against the Ultramarines in the Ultramar sector. Led by their Primarch, Reaper, the Ultramarines fought valiantly to defend their worlds from Mortarion's forces. But the Plague Wars were not fought with guns and swords alone, they were fought with disease. Mortarion unleashed some of Nurgle's most horrific plagues upon the planets of Ultramar, turning vibrant, thriving worlds into festering wastelands. Cities crumbled under the weight of Nurgle's gifts, and entire populations were consumed by the plague god's rot. Despite his overwhelming power, Mortarion's campaigns are not without opposition. Reaper, now returned to life and leading the forces of the Imperium as the Lord Commander, has proven to be a formidable adversary. The battles between Mortarion and Guilliman are more than just military conflicts. They are clashes of philosophy. Guilliman represents order, progress, and the hope of a better future, while Mortarion embodies decay, despair, and the inevitable downfall of all things. These battles are not just physical contests, but ideological ones, as each Primarch seeks to impose his vision on the galaxy. But even as Mortarion wages war against his brother, he remains haunted by his past. The bitterness that once drove him to reject the Emperor still lingers, festering like an old wound. Mortarion's hatred for the Emperor has not diminished over the millennia, and he longs for the day when he can finally see the Imperium brought to its knees. Yet deep down, Mortarion knows that even if he were to succeed, his victory would be hollow. For in his heart, Mortarion is not truly free. He is a slave to Nurgle, bound by chains of rot and decay that he can never escape. Chapter 4. The Lords of the Death Guard. Of all the Lords of the Death Guard, none stand more prominently at Mortarion's side than Typhus, the Herald of Nurgle, also known as Typhus the Traveller. Once known as Callus Typhon, he was the first captain of the Death Guard Legion and Mortarion's trusted lieutenant. But his journey toward the full embrace of Nurgle took its own dark path. Typhus was born on the poisoned world of Barbarous, much like Mortarion and the original warriors of the Death Guard. He was forged in the same crucible of toxic mists and brutal overlords that shaped his Primarch. Typhus possessed a unique affinity for the arcane, and even before his corruption, he was regarded with suspicion by some of his brothers for his psychic abilities that he kept hidden from Mortarion, knowing his Primarch's hatred for the sorcery that had enslaved their homeworld. However, this arcane strength would eventually become one of Typhus's greatest assets. His psychic powers allowed him to commune with the denizens of the warp, and it was this connection that first opened Typhus's mind to the possibility of corruption. While Mortarion's fall to Nurgle was slow and reluctant, Typhus embraced the dark god's gifts eagerly, seeing in Nurgle's plagues not only strength, but a way to transcend the mortal coil entirely. It was Typhus who ultimately ensured the Death Guard's submission to Nurgle. During the Legion's ill-fated journey through the warp during the Horus Heresy, Typhus secretly disabled the fleet's Geller fields, the protective shields that kept the horrors of the warp at bay. With the Death Guard now exposed, Nurgle's plagues were free to ravage the legion, and Typhus stood by as his brothers suffered unimaginable agony. In their moment of greatest desperation, Nurgle appeared to Mortarion and offered salvation, if only he would accept the plague god's gifts. Reluctantly, Mortarion submitted, and the Death Guard were reborn as Nurgle's chosen warriors. For Typhus, this was a moment of triumph. While Mortarion saw their transformation as a necessary evil, Typhus reveled in it. He had already embraced Nurgle's blessings long before the rest of the Legion, and now he stood as one of the foremost champions of the Plague God. As the Herald of Nurgle, Typhus leads the Plague Fleet, a terrifying armada that spreads Nurgle's contagion across the galaxy. His title of Traveler is well earned, for Typhus is constantly on the move, searching for new worlds to infect and new enemies to lay low. He is a master of biological warfare, wielding Nurgle's diseases with terrifying precision. Entire planetary populations have been reduced to nothing more than shambling plague-ridden husks in Typhus's wake. He takes grim satisfaction in watching entire civilizations crumble under the weight of Nurgle's blessings, knowing that their suffering serves the greater purpose of spreading the plague god's influence. Typhus is not just a warrior, he is a disease, a living embodiment of the contagions he spreads. His most famous weapon is the Man-Reaper, a massive scythe that he wields with deadly precision, but his true power lies in the Destroyer Plague, a virulent disease that festers within his body. Those unlucky enough to face Typhus in battle often find themselves overwhelmed by the sheer number of infected that follow in his wake. Wherever he goes, the dead rise to serve him, their bodies animated by Nurgle's will. These plague zombies, as they are often called, form a mindless horde that grows with every battle Typhus fights. Despite his allegiance to Nurgle, Typhus's relationship with Mortarion is fraught with tension. While Mortarion remains the undisputed leader of the Death Guard, Typhus harbors ambitions of his own. He believes that he is Nurgle's true champion, and his contempt for Mortarion's reluctance to fully embrace the Plague God has only grown over the millennia. Typhus's loyalty to Mortarion is questionable at best, and there are whispers that he might one day attempt to usurp his Primarch's throne. For now, however, Typhus remains one of the most feared and respected figures in the Death Guard, a walking plague whose name is synonymous with death and decay. Though Typhus is perhaps the most famous of the Death Guard's commanders, he is far from the only notable figure in the Legion's ranks. The Death Guard are filled with characters who have earned their place through strength, cunning, or sheer resilience. These individuals each play a crucial role in leading the Death Guard's warbands across the galaxy, spreading Nurgle's influence far and wide. One such figure is Ulvax the Putrid, a plague surgeon who has garnered a reputation as one of the most sadistic and cruel members of the Death Guard. Plague surgeons are responsible for tending to the physical and often grotesque needs of the Death Guard's warriors. Their role is to heal their brothers, but in reality their methods are anything but merciful. Ulvax takes great pleasure in performing his duties, using his medical knowledge to further Nurgle's experiments. He often uses the bodies of his fallen brothers as living test subjects, inflicting them with new and virulent strains of disease to see how their bodies react. For Ulvax, suffering is the ultimate form of devotion to Nurgle, and he sees his work as a sacred duty. Then there is Necrosius, a former librarian who became one of Nurgle's most powerful sorcerers. After the Librarius divisions were disbanded by the Emperor, many of the Death Guard's psychers found themselves without a purpose. Necrosius, however, found a new calling in the service of Nurgle. He fully embraced the powers of the Warp, using his psychic abilities to summon demons and spread Nurgle's diseases. Necrosis is a fanatical devotee of the Plague God, believing that his psychic powers are a gift from Nurgle himself. He leads his own warband, known as the Apostles of Contagion, and is feared for his ability to unleash devastating psychic attacks that cripple his enemies and spread disease across entire battlefields. Another infamous figure is Gulgror the Foul, a Blightlord Terminator who has earned a reputation for his brutal efficiency in combat. Blightlords are the elite of the Death Guard, clad in ancient suits of Terminator armor that have been corrupted and strengthened by Nurgle's blessings. Gulgror is one of the most feared of their number, known for his relentless pursuit of his enemies and his ability to endure even the most grievous wounds. Gulgror has led countless assaults on Imperial worlds, and his presence on the battlefield is often enough to turn the tide in the DEATHGUARD's favor. In addition to these characters, there are countless Plague Champions who command smaller warbands of the DEATHGUARD. These Plague Champions are often individuals who have distinguished themselves in battle or who have shown a particular aptitude for spreading Nurgle's plagues. They lead their warbands with a combination of brutal efficiency and fanatical devotion, ensuring that Nurgle's will is carried out wherever they go. The DEATHGUARD's leadership structure is a reflection of Nurgle's influence, with a hierarchy that blends mortal commanders and demonic entities in a grotesque but effective system of control. At the top of this hierarchy is Mortarion, the demon primarch of the DEATHGUARD and the undisputed leader of the Legion. Mortarion's authority is absolute, though as we've seen, his relationship with his subordinates, particularly Typhus, is far from harmonious. Beneath Mortarion, the DEATHGUARD's leadership is divided into two main groups: the mortal commanders, including Plague Lords, Plague Champions, and Blight Lords, and the demonic entities that serve Nurgle, such as Great Unclean Ones and Plague Bearers. Plague Lords are the most powerful mortal commanders within the DEATHGUARD, each leading a substantial portion of the Legion's forces. These individuals have earned their rank through centuries of service and have often been blessed by Nurgle with various mutations and gifts. Plague Lords wield immense power both on the battlefield and within the DEATHGUARD's hierarchy, and they are responsible for organizing and leading the Legion's campaigns across the galaxy. Plague Champions serve as the commanders of smaller warbands, leading their forces in more localized campaigns. While they do not have the same level of authority as the Plague Lords, they are still feared and respected figures within the Legion. Many Plague Champions aspire to rise through the ranks, hoping to earn greater favor from Nurgle and eventually become Plague Lords themselves. Alongside the mortal commanders, the DEATHGUARD's hierarchy also includes numerous demonic entities. Great Unclean Ones, the greater demons of Nurgle, are often called upon to assist in the DEATHGUARD's campaigns, particularly in major battles where their immense power is needed. These demons are not mere foot soldiers. They are highly intelligent and cunning beings who hold a significant amount of influence within Nurgle's realm. In many cases, they work alongside the mortal commanders of the DEATHGUARD, providing both tactical support and the raw power of the warp. Plague Bearers, the lesser demons of Nurgle, serve as the foot soldiers of the Plague God's armies. While they lack the raw power of the Great Unclean Ones, they are tireless and resilient, able to endure incredible amounts of punishment. On the battlefield, Plague Bearers form the backbone of the DEATHGUARD's demonic forces, often overwhelming their enemies through sheer numbers and persistence. The DEATHGUARD's hierarchy is one of decay and endurance, reflecting the very nature of Nurgle himself. It is a system where power is earned through suffering and where loyalty is measured by one's willingness to embrace Nurgle's gifts. The commanders of the DEATHGUARD lead their forces with the knowledge that they are serving a higher purpose, a purpose that transcends mere conquest and destruction. For them, the spread of Nurgle's plagues is not just a means to an end, it is an end in itself, a sacred mission to bring the gifts of decay and rebirth to the galaxy. Chapter 5. Nurgle's Gifts and Plagues. In the pantheon of chaos, Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, stands apart not only for his grotesque appearance and domain over diseases, but for the paradoxical nature of his power. To outsiders, Nurgle's realm may seem to be one of endless suffering, but to his followers it is a gift, a twisted form of immortality through the embrace of entropy and rot. As the DEATHGUARD know all too well, to serve Nurgle is to accept the inevitability of decay, and in doing so to be reborn as something far stronger. This chapter will explore the nature of Nurgle's gifts, the plagues that ravage the galaxy in his name, and the unholy blessings that he bestows upon those who are willing to embrace his philosophy of decay. Nurgle is the chaos god of decay, disease, and death, but also of life, rebirth, and endurance. At first glance, these ideas may seem contradictory, but they form the core of Nurgle's philosophy. To Nurgle, decay is not an end, but a beginning. Just as a rotting corpse gives rise to new life, so too does the destruction of civilizations create the fertile ground for something new to grow. Nurgle's domain encompasses all forms of decay and transformation. Where others see sickness as a force of destruction, Nurgle sees it as a process of renewal. Disease, death, and rot are all part of the natural cycle, and those who embrace Nurgle's gifts are freed from the fear of mortality. In fact, Nurgle's followers believe that they are blessed with a form of immortality. For even though their bodies may be ravaged by disease, they continue to endure, kept alive by Nurgle's will. Within the broader Chaos pantheon, Nurgle occupies a unique position. Unlike Khorne, the god of war and bloodshed, or Tzeentch, the god of change and manipulation, Nurgle offers his followers a kind of dark comfort. He is often depicted as jovial and welcoming, his massive, bloated form bursting with festering life. His followers refer to him as Grandfather Nurgle or Papa Nurgle, a testament to the strange affection that they feel for their patron god. Yet beneath this veneer of paternal warmth lies a terrifying truth. Nurgle is a god of stagnation as much as he is of growth. Once his gifts take hold, they transform their recipients into grotesque parodies of life, their bodies bloated and swollen with disease, yet unable to die. This is the price of Nurgle's blessings, eternal life, but at the cost of one's humanity. For the DEATHGUARD, Nurgle's gifts are both a source of strength and a symbol of their damnation. When Mortarion and his legion first accepted Nurgle's embrace, they did so out of desperation, seeking a way to escape the torment of the warp. In return, Nurgle gave them the power to endure anything, from the most devastating weapons to the most virulent diseases. But this power came at a price. Their bodies were transformed, their flesh twisted and diseased, yet they could not die. The DEATHGUARD became walking plagues, carriers of Nurgle's contagions, spreading his influence wherever they went. For Nurgle's followers, decay is not something to be feared, but celebrated. It is the natural state of all things, and by accepting it, they believe that they are freed from the burdens of mortality and weakness. To serve Nurgle is to embrace the inevitability of death, but also to transcend it, to become part of the eternal cycle of decay and rebirth. At the heart of Nurgle's power are his plagues, diseases so virulent and devastating that they can wipe out entire civilizations in a matter of days. These plagues are not mere weapons of destruction. They are gifts from Nurgle, meant to spread his influence across the galaxy. For the DEATHGUARD, these diseases are tools of war, used to weaken and demoralize their enemies before the killing blow is struck. One of the most infamous of Nurgle's plagues is the Destroyer Plague, a virulent infection that is spread by typhus, herald of Nurgle. The Destroyer Plague is a living disease, constantly mutating and adapting to the bodies of its victims. It is said that no two strains of the Destroyer Plague are alike, and those who contract it are doomed to a slow, agonizing death. Their bodies swell with pus and rot, their flesh sloughing off in great chunks, yet they remain alive, conscious of their suffering, until the disease finally consumes them. But death is not the end, for those infected by the Destroyer Plague often rise again as plague zombies, mindless, shambling husks that obey only Nurgle's will. Another devastating plague is the Zombie Plague, a disease that reanimates the dead, turning them into Nurgle's servants. This plague is often spread through battlefields, where the corpses of fallen soldiers are reanimated to fight once more. The Zombie Plague is terrifying not just for its ability to raise the dead, but for its psychological impact on the living. To see one's comrades rise again as rotting, mindless husks can shatter the morale of even the most battle-hardened warriors. The bubonic plague is another of Nurgle's favorites, a disease that causes the body to bloat with fluid-filled buboes, bursting open to spread the infection to others. The bubonic plague is slow but insidious. often taking weeks or months to fully kill its victims. In that time, those infected become walking carriers of the disease, spreading it to anyone they come into contact with. But perhaps the most terrifying of Nurgle's plagues is the Gellerpox, a disease that infects the very essence of reality. The Gellerpox corrupts the Geller fields that protect ships traveling through the warp, turning them into conduits for Nurgle's power. Once a Geller field is infected, it warps and distorts, allowing demons to breach the material realm. Entire starships have been lost to the Gellerpox, their crews transformed into grotesque, plague-ridden abominations, their souls consumed by Nurgle's demons. These are just a few examples of the countless plagues that Nurgle has created. Each is a masterpiece of destruction, tailored to spread as much suffering and disease as possible. For Nurgle's followers, the spread of these plagues is a form of worship, a way to demonstrate their devotion to their god. Every world that falls to Nurgle's contagions is another victory for the plague god, another step toward his ultimate goal of spreading decay and rebirth to every corner of the galaxy. While Nurgle's plagues are his most visible form of influence, his true power lies in the unholy gifts he bestows upon his followers. These gifts are mutations and transformations that warp the bodies of those who serve Nurgle, turning them into grotesque, plague-ridden creatures. To the uninitiated, these mutations may seem like curses, but to Nurgle's followers, they are blessings, proof that they have been chosen by the plague god. One of the most common gifts that Nurgle bestows is the plague-Astartes transformation. When a space marine first accepts Nurgle's blessing, his body begins to warp and mutate. His flesh becomes bloated and swollen with disease, his skin turning a sickly green or purple hue. Open sores and pustules cover his body, oozing pus and filth with every movement. Yet, despite these horrific changes, the Plague Marine remains alive, his body sustained by Nurgle's power. He becomes stronger, more resilient, able to endure wounds that would kill even the toughest of warriors. Pain and suffering become irrelevant, for Nurgle's blessings allow his followers to transcend the limits of their flesh. Some of Nurgle's followers are blessed with more specific mutations. The horn of Nurgle is a common mutation where a massive horn-like growth emerges from the forehead or skull of the Plague Marine. This horn is often symbolic of Nurgle's favor, a mark that sets its bearer apart as one of Nurgle's chosen. The mark of Nurgle, a symbol that represents Nurgle's power, is another common gift. This mark can manifest as a physical brand on the skin or as a more subtle, metaphysical presence that protects the bearer from harm. Then there are the unholy resurrections, where those who die in Nurgle's service are often raised again to fight on. These warriors, known as plague bearers, are demonic entities in service to Nurgle. They are the souls of Nurgle's most devoted followers, transformed into demons to serve him for eternity. Plague bearers are covered in sores and pustules, their bodies constantly rotting and regenerating in an endless cycle of decay. They are slow and methodical in battle, wielding rusted blades that carry Nurgle's plagues, infecting their enemies with every strike. Nurgle's blessings are not limited to physical transformations. He also grants his followers the ability to wield his diseases as weapons. Nurgle's rot is a particularly insidious ability, where a plague marine can spread a virulent disease with a mere touch. This disease spreads rapidly, infecting anyone who comes into contact with the afflicted, turning entire populations into plague-ridden husks in a matter of days. Chapter 6. Warfare of the Death Guard. The Death Guard are one of the most feared forces in the galaxy, not just for their resilience and brutality, but for their unique methods of warfare. Unlike other legions, which may rely on speed, precision, or overwhelming firepower, the Death Guard are patient and methodical. Their approach to war mirrors the philosophy of Nurgle himself, slow, inevitable, and utterly devastating. In this chapter, we will delve into the tactics, famous battles, and current conflicts involving the Death Guard as they spread decay and corruption across the galaxy. The Death Guard's tactics are built around one fundamental principle: endurance. Mortarion's legion prides itself on its ability to withstand even the most harrowing conditions, whether it be enemy fire, toxic environments, or the diseases they carry within themselves. The Death Guard are known for their attritional warfare, grinding down their enemies through sheer endurance while spreading Nurgle's plagues to weaken and demoralize their foes. While some Chaos forces rely on the speed and mobility of demon engines or warp sorcery, the Death Guard operate at a slow and deliberate pace. Their warriors, now swollen and twisted by Nurgle's blessings, march inexorably across battlefields, impervious to damage that would destroy lesser beings. They do not rush to victory. They simply endure until their enemies can no longer resist. The Death Guard's most devastating weapon is disease itself. They are masters of biological warfare, using Nurgle's plagues as weapons to weaken and cripple enemy forces. Before a battle even begins, the Death Guard unleash waves of spore clouds, viral contaminants, and corrupting plagues into the atmosphere of a planet, softening up their enemies by introducing lethal diseases that spread rapidly among both civilian and military populations. As the enemy grows sick and weak, the Death Guard advance, spreading more contagion with every step. One of the most infamous tactics of the Death Guard is their use of plague bombs, munitions filled with virulent diseases that explode upon impact, releasing deadly pathogens into the air. These bombs, often dropped from orbit or delivered by artillery, can devastate entire cities in a matter of hours, killing millions and turning survivors into festering, disease-ridden husks. The psychological impact of such attacks is profound. Many enemies of the Death Guard surrender long before the first shot is fired, terrified by the thought of dying slowly from one of Nurgle's plagues. In close combat, the Death Guard are no less lethal. Their weapons, often rusted and corroded by Nurgle's rot, are imbued with deadly contagions that infect anyone they touch. Even a glancing blow from a plague marine's blade can introduce a host of infections into the body of an enemy, quickly debilitating them and leaving them vulnerable to further attacks. The Death Guard are also known for their use of demon engines, massive, plague-infested war machines that march alongside their mortal forces. These demon engines, such as the Plagueburst Crawler and Myphitic Blight Hauler, are living manifestations of Nurgle's power, their rotting, diseased forms immune to conventional weapons. They spew clouds of toxic filth and hurl disease-ridden shells into the ranks of their enemies, further spreading the corruption that the Death Guard thrive on. But perhaps the most feared weapon in the Death Guard's arsenal is Nurgle's rot, a virulent disease that can spread from one victim to the next with terrifying speed. Those afflicted by Nurgle's rot suffer an agonizing death as their bodies swell with disease, their flesh rotting away even as they remain conscious. Once dead, their corpses often rise again as plague zombies, mindless servants of Nurgle that spread the disease even further. The Death Guard's approach to warfare is one of total corruption. They do not seek a quick victory. Instead, they aim to completely overwhelm their enemies, breaking them down physically and mentally through a combination of relentless attacks and the ever-present threat of disease. For the Death Guard, the battlefield is a place of slow, inevitable decay, where every step they take brings them closer to victory as their enemies succumb to Nurgle's gifts. Throughout the history of the Death Guard, there have been numerous battles where their unique brand of warfare has brought entire worlds to ruin. Their tactics of attrition, biological warfare, and sheer resilience have made them one of the most feared forces in the galaxy, and their role in key battles has left a lasting mark on the history of Warhammer 40k. One of the most significant battles in the history of the Death Guard was the Siege of Terra, the climactic conflict that marked the end of the Horus Heresy. As part of Horus's traitor legions, the Death Guard played a key role in the assault on the Imperial Palace, marching through the toxic wastelands of Terra with grim determination. Mortarion himself led his forces, wielding his scythe and spreading death and decay with every swing. While the traitor forces ultimately failed to take Terra, the Death Guard's presence left a lasting scar on the planet, and the diseases they spread during the battle would continue to ravage the Imperial forces for years to come. Another infamous battle involving the Death Guard was the War of Plague on Ultramar, a massive conflict that saw Mortarion and his DEATHGUARD forces invade the realm of Ultramar, home to the Ultramarines. This campaign, part of the larger Plague Wars, was one of Nurgle's greatest efforts to spread his influence across the galaxy. The DEATHGUARD unleashed countless plagues upon the worlds of Ultramar, turning once thriving cities into desolate wastelands filled with rotting corpses. The Ultramarines, led by their Primarch Roboute Guilliman, were forced to fight a brutal, grinding war of attrition against Mortarion's forces, their advanced tactics and weaponry struggling to overcome the relentless resilience of the DEATHGUARD. During the Battle of Ix, one of the most important planets in Ultramar, the DEATHGUARD unleashed a particularly virulent strain of Nurgle's rot that decimated the planet's population. The once beautiful world became a plague-infested wasteland, with the few survivors either fleeing in terror or succumbing to Nurgle's diseases. While Guilliman was ultimately able to drive the DEATHGUARD from Ultramar, the damage had been done, and the worlds of Ultramar would never fully recover from the devastation. The Pox Wars were another key conflict in the DEATHGUARD's history, a series of campaigns fought across the galaxy to spread Nurgle's influence. During these wars, the DEATHGUARD targeted isolated Imperial worlds, unleashing their plagues and leaving entire systems in ruins. One of the most famous battles in the Pox Wars was the Siege of Vrax, where the DEATHGUARD laid siege to the planet Vrax, an important Imperial stronghold. The siege lasted for years, with the DEATHGUARD slowly wearing down the defenders through a combination of attrition and biological warfare. By the time the DEATHGUARD finally broke through the Imperial defenses, Vrax was a desolate wasteland, its cities reduced to rubble and its population wiped out by Nurgle's plagues. In the 41st millennium, the DEATHGUARD continued to be one of the most feared forces in the galaxy. As Nurgle's chosen warriors, they march across the stars, spreading disease and corruption wherever they go. While Mortarion remains the undisputed leader of the DEATHGUARD, many of his lieutenants and warbands operate independently, waging their own wars in Nurgle's name. One of the most prominent figures in the DEATHGUARD's modern campaigns is Typhus, the herald of Nurgle and leader of the Plague Fleet. Typhus leads countless raids across the galaxy, using his fleet to spread Nurgle's plagues to unsuspecting worlds. His most infamous campaign was the Scouring of the Ghoul Stars, where he unleashed the Destroyer Plague upon an entire sector, killing billions and turning the once thriving region into a wasteland of disease and death. In recent times, the DEATHGUARD have played a key role in the ongoing Indomitus Crusade, the massive campaign launched by Roboute Guilliman to reclaim lost Imperial worlds. As the Imperium fights to hold back the forces of chaos, the DEATHGUARD have become one of their most dangerous enemies, using their plagues and endurance to turn the tide of battle in favor of the ruinous powers. Whether fighting on the front lines of the Indomitus Crusade or launching raids against vulnerable Imperial worlds, the DEATHGUARD remain a constant threat to the stability of the galaxy. Their warfare, while slow and deliberate, is utterly devastating, and their plagues continue to ravage entire star systems. The DEATHGUARD's legacy is one of decay and ruin, and their presence in the modern era of Warhammer 40k serves as a grim reminder of the power of Nurgle and the endless threat posed by the forces of chaos. Chapter 7. Demons of Nurgle. As potent as the DEATHGUARD's mortal forces are, they do not fight alone. They are accompanied by the legions of Nurgle's demons, foul and grotesque creatures born from the warp, each a manifestation of their patron god's endless obsession with decay and rebirth. These demons fight alongside the DEATHGUARD, spreading plagues and diseases across the galaxy, while further strengthening Nurgle's grasp on the material world. In this chapter, we'll explore the various demons of Nurgle, their role in the DEATHGUARD's conquests, and the sickening war machines that these beings bring to the battlefield. Nurgle's demons are as varied and twisted as the diseases he spreads, each one representing some aspect of decay, filth, and rot. These creatures are often hideous in appearance, bloated with pestilence, and covered in open sores, their bodies dripping with pus and filth. Yet for all their repulsiveness, Nurgle's demons are incredibly dangerous, wielding the power of entropy itself to break down and destroy the physical world. At the heart of Nurgle's demon legions are the plague-bearers, also known as Nurgle's tallymen. These demons act as the rank-and-file troops of Nurgle's armies, their role to count the number of diseases and plagues spread by their forces. Each plague-bearer is a sickly, rotting creature, their bodies bloated with pestilence, yet they are unnervingly resilient, much like the DEATHGUARD themselves. These demons wield rusted, disease-ridden blades, infecting any foe they strike with virulent illnesses that quickly spread through enemy ranks. Though slow and methodical, the plague-bearers' resilience and their ability to summon the power of Nurgle's plagues make them formidable opponents in battle. One of the more bizarre and twisted creatures in Nurgle's service are the Nurglings, tiny, mischievous demons that embody Nurgle's twisted sense of humor. These impish beings are small, grotesque creatures with bulbous bodies filled with pus and bile. They often swarm across battlefields in large numbers, overwhelming enemies with sheer numbers. While individually weak, Nurglings are surprisingly dangerous due to their ability to spread disease wherever they go. They bite, scratch, and claw at their enemies, infecting them with Nurgle's corruption. Nurglings often accompany higher-ranking demons, such as Great Unclean Ones or Demon Princes, acting as both servants and companions to these foul entities. The most powerful of Nurgle's demons are the Great Unclean Ones, massive, corpulent beings that serve as generals in Nurgle's armies. These towering monstrosities are embodiments of Nurgle's will, their bloated forms filled with filth and rot. Great Unclean Ones are both horrific to behold and devastating on the battlefield. They are slow-moving but immensely strong, their rotting flesh capable of withstanding an immense amount of damage. Despite their horrifying appearance, these demons often possess a disturbingly jovial demeanor, viewing their role in spreading disease as a joyous gift to the galaxy. They carry massive rusted swords and staffs which spread disease and corruption with every strike, while their very presence causes the ground to rot and fester around them. In addition to the more commonly encountered demons, Nurgle's legions also include a host of more specialized creatures, such as beasts of Nurgle, plague drones, and poxbringers. Each of these creatures serves a unique role within Nurgle's hierarchy, from the toxic spewing plague toads to the buzzing, disease-ridden rotflies that swarm the skies. These beings help spread Nurgle's corruption to every corner of the battlefield, ensuring that no foe can escape the touch of decay. While these demons are terrifying in their own right, what makes them particularly dangerous is their symbiotic relationship with the DEATHGUARD. On their own, the DEATHGUARD are already formidable warriors, but with the addition of Nurgle's demons, they become nearly unstoppable. Together, these forces work in unison, spreading disease, filth, and entropy across the galaxy in Nurgle's name. The DEATHGUARD's connection to Nurgle grants them the ability to summon these demonic allies during battle. Summoning demons is a dark and dangerous art, requiring powerful rituals and the ability to manipulate the raw energy of the warp. Mortarion, Typhus, and the DEATHGUARD's sorcerers and plague casters are well versed in this forbidden knowledge, calling forth Nurgle's demons to assist them in their conquests. During battle, DEATHGUARD commanders often use rituals of decay to tear open rifts in reality, allowing Nurgle's demons to spill forth into the material realm. These rituals usually involve spreading corruption and disease across the battlefield, with the blood and suffering of the dying acting as fuel for the ritual. As the veil between the warp and real space weakens, Nurgle's demons surge forth, ready to spread decay and destruction in their master's name. The process of summoning demons is not without risk. Manipulating the warp is always a dangerous endeavor, and even the most experienced DEATHGUARD sorcerer can find themselves overwhelmed by the chaotic energy they are attempting to harness. Should a summoning go wrong, the results can be catastrophic, with the demons turning on their would-be summoners or causing unpredictable rifts in reality that can consume entire armies. However, for the Death Guard, the rewards of summoning demonic allies far outweigh the risks. Once summoned, NURGLES demons fight alongside the Death Guard as equals. Plague-bearers and great unclean ones march in step with the Plague Marines, while Nurglings and beasts of Nurgle swarm over the battlefield, spreading disease and filth in their wake. The presence of these demons bolsters the Death Guard's forces, allowing them to overwhelm even the most entrenched enemy positions. As the battle progresses, the combination of the Death Guard's endurance and the demons' supernatural resilience often leads to the slow, inevitable defeat of their foes. In addition to their role in battle, Nurgle's demons are also vital to the Death Guard's efforts in spreading corruption across entire worlds. After a planet has been conquered, Nurgle's demons often linger, spreading their filth and corruption across the land. This ensures that even after the Death Guard have moved on to their next conquest, the planet remains a festering monument to Nurgle's power, its cities and landscapes twisted beyond recognition by the forces of decay. In addition to Nurgle's demonic legions, the Death Guard also make use of demon engines, horrific war machines that combine the mechanical technology of the Imperium with the dark powers of chaos. These twisted creations are infused with the essence of demons, allowing them to move and fight as living entities, their corrupted machine bodies driven by Nurgle's will. One of the most infamous demon engines in the Death Guard's arsenal is the Plague Burst Crawler. This hulking, tracked war machine serves as a mobile artillery platform, its rotting form bristling with plague-spitting cannons and other vile weapons. The Plague Burst Crawler's main weapon, the Plague Burst Mortar, launches disease-ridden shells at enemy fortifications and troop formations, spreading Nurgle's corruption far and wide. The crawler itself is highly resilient, its rusted armor plates infused with the power of Nurgle, making it nearly impervious to damage. It slowly crawls across the battlefield, bringing death and decay wherever it goes. Another key demon engine in the Death Guard's forces is the Myphitic Blight Hauler, a smaller, more mobile war machine that serves as both a support unit and a combat vehicle. Blight Haulers are often found in the thick of battle, their diseased cannons and claws tearing through enemy ranks, while their aura of corruption spreads filth across the battlefield. These machines are infused with the same resilience as their larger counterparts, making them difficult to destroy and allowing them to continue fighting even when heavily damaged. The fetid bloat drone is another abomination in the Death Guard's arsenal. These flying demon engines are equipped with a variety of vile weaponry, including toxic sprays, flesh-melting acids and plague spitters that saturate enemy forces with Nurgle's diseases from the air. Bloat drones are often used to disrupt enemy lines, sowing confusion and panic as they spew toxic filth across the battlefield. The demon engines of the Death Guard are more than just machines of war. They are living embodiments of Nurgle's will. Their combination of technology and demonic corruption makes them an integral part of the Death Guard's war machine, allowing them to spread filth and decay across the galaxy with relentless efficiency. These horrific creations are a testament to the twisted ingenuity of the Death Guard and the dark power of Nurgle. Chapter 8: The Death Guard in the Wider Galaxy. The Death Guard is far more than a localized threat or a mere band of renegades in the grand scheme of the Warhammer 40k universe. Their corruption spreads across vast reaches of the galaxy, their influence felt by countless civilizations. The plague-ridden sons of Mortarion have become an unrelenting scourge on both the material realm and the warp, their slow, methodical nature ensuring that their conquests are as inevitable as they are horrific. This chapter explores the impact of the Death Guard on the Imperium, their relationships with other Chaos Legions, and their potential role in shaping the future of the galaxy. Few forces in the galaxy are as feared by the Imperium as the Death Guard. Unlike other Chaos Legions, whose strategies revolve around blitz assaults or psychological warfare, the Death Guard approaches war with a slow, relentless, and ultimately devastating methodology. They do not seek a rapid victory. Instead, they aim to rot their enemies from the inside out, both figuratively and literally. When the Death Guard invades a planet, the first casualties are rarely from the battle itself. The Death Guard relies heavily on the spread of contagion to do the initial work for them. Through viruses, plagues, and noxious fumes, entire cities and even planets can be turned into festering hives of disease. Citizens who once pledged loyalty to the Emperor find themselves coughing up blood, their flesh blistering and their minds descending into madness as the diseases take hold. Entire planetary defenses are often overwhelmed without the Death Guard firing a single shot, with entire garrisons collapsing under the weight of infection. For the Imperium, dealing with the Death Guard represents a unique challenge. Standard military tactics, such as blitz assaults and orbital bombardments, often prove ineffective. The Death Guard are notoriously resilient, their bodies able to survive damage that would decimate a normal space marine or soldier. Standard-issue munitions and weapons, especially projectile-based weaponry, have little effect against the bloated, plague-ridden warriors of Nurgle. Entire regiments of the Astra Militarum have been decimated by the Death Guard, their front lines withering before they can even mount an effective defense. Perhaps the greatest horror the Death Guard brings to the Imperium is not their military might, but the psychological and environmental devastation they leave behind. After a Death Guard invasion, entire planets are rendered uninhabitable. Even if the Death Guard is driven off, the planet's ecosystem is left so tainted by corruption and disease that resettlement is impossible. In many cases, the Imperium is forced to declare the planet perdita or resort to extreme measures such as exterminatus to prevent the contagion from spreading further. The greatest example of this impact can be seen during the Plague Wars on Ultramar, where the Death Guard, led by Mortarion himself, sought to corrupt one of the most vital strongholds of the Imperium. Despite the fierce resistance of Robut Guilliman and his Ultramarines, Mortarion's Death Guard succeeded in turning vast regions of Ultramar into plague-infested wastelands. The battle against the Death Guard became as much a war against disease as it was against chaos itself, and the repercussions are still felt to this day. Though the Death Guard is united in its service to Nurgle, their relationships with other Chaos Legions are far from harmonious. The nature of chaos is divisive and competitive, and even those who serve the dark gods often find themselves at odds with one another. This is especially true for the Death Guard, whose stubborn, unyielding nature often places them in direct conflict with other chaos forces. One of the most notable rivalries exists between the Death Guard and the Emperor's children, led by Fulgrim, the demon Primarch of Slaanesh. While the Emperor's children pursue perfection, excess, and sensation in all things, the Death Guard values endurance, stagnation, and decay. Their diametrically opposed philosophies have often led to clashes on the battlefield, with the Death Guard finding the hedonistic and flamboyant tactics of the Emperor's children repulsive. In turn, Fulgrim's warriors view the Death Guard's methods as crude and revolting. Another significant rivalry is between the Death Guard and the World Eaters, the bloodthirsty servants of Khorne. While the World Eaters embrace the frenzy of battle and the immediate gratification of slaughter, the Death Guard's more methodical approach to warfare often puts them at odds. This tension stems from both philosophical differences and simple territorial disputes, as the forces of Khorne seek quick and decisive victories, while the Death Guard prefers a slow, grinding war of attrition. There have been numerous instances where Death Guard warbands have clashed with the forces of Khorne, each determined to prove the superiority of their patron god. The Death Guard's relationship with the Thousand Sons, the Legion of Tzeentch, is similarly fraught with tension. Tzeentch is the chaos god of change, ambition, and magic, and his followers are constantly seeking to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. In contrast, the Death Guard values decay, entropy, and the natural order of death and rebirth. The slow, inevitable processes of disease are at odds with the constantly shifting and changing nature of Tzeentch's schemes. This philosophical divide has led to skirmishes between the Death Guard and the Thousand Sons, with each side seeking to undermine the other's plans. Despite these rivalries, there are times when the forces of chaos unite under a common cause. The nature of the great game played by the Chaos Gods ensures that alliances between their followers are always fragile and temporary. But in moments of great need, the Death Guard has fought alongside other Chaos legions to achieve mutual goals. However, these alliances are always fraught with mistrust, and it is not uncommon for the Death Guard to betray or sabotage their erstwhile allies when it suits their purposes. As the galaxy hurtles towards an uncertain and dark future, the role of the Death Guard in these events is one of grim inevitability. Nurgle's influence continues to spread, and the Death Guard is at the forefront of this plague of corruption. Under the leadership of Mortarion, the Reaper Primarch, the Death Guard has established itself as one of the most formidable and enduring threats to the Imperium and the wider galaxy. One key aspect of the Death Guard's future lies in its continued rivalry with Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines and the newly returned avenging son of the Emperor. The plague wars between Mortarion and Guilliman were but the beginning of a larger conflict between the two brothers, and many within the Death Guard believe that Mortarion's ultimate destiny is to see Guilliman fall. This personal vendetta between the two Primarchs will likely shape the future of the Death Guard's campaigns, as Mortarion seeks to outmaneuver and ultimately destroy his brother. Furthermore, the rise of new enemies, such as the Necrons, the Tyranids, and even the resurgence of ancient threats like the Aeldari, pose additional challenges for the Death Guard. While these Xenos forces represent formidable foes, the Death Guard's resilience and ability to spread disease make them uniquely suited to fighting such adversaries. It is likely that as the galaxy continues to descend into chaos, the Death Guard will find new opportunities to spread Nurgle's corruption to these alien races, further expanding their influence. Ultimately, the Death Guard's future is tied to the greater machinations of Nurgle, the Lord of Decay. As long as disease, rot, and entropy exist, the Death Guard will remain a force of unstoppable decay in the galaxy. Whether they are fighting the Imperium, other Chaos legions, or alien threats, the Death Guard's role as the harbingers of Nurgle's will ensures that their legacy will endure long into the grim darkness of the future. The tale of the Death Guard is one of resilience, corruption, and an unwavering commitment to the dark principles of Nurgle, the Chaos God of Decay. From their humble origins on the toxic world of Barbarous to their ascension as one of the most feared and enduring forces in the galaxy, the Death Guard's journey is one of transformation and inevitable decay. Led by Mortarion, the Reaper Primarch, they have become a symbol of the slow, relentless march of entropy, unstoppable and inevitable. Throughout this video, we have explored the origins of the Death Guard, their fall to chaos, and their role as both warriors and plague spreaders in the service of Nurgle. We have examined the intricate relationships they hold with other Chaos forces, their ongoing conflict with the Imperium, and the demons and war machines that aid them in their grim mission to spread decay across the stars. The Death Guard's story is far from over. As the galaxy continues to spiral into chaos, they will remain a force of corruption, spreading plagues and despair in Nurgle's name. The future of the Death Guard, and indeed the galaxy itself, remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. Wherever there is life, there is also decay, and the Death Guard will be there to hasten the inevitable rot. Thank you for watching Tales of the Grimdark. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of the Death Guard, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with all our future videos.